Life has a funny way of blindsiding you when you least expect it. My name's Jake, and for the past 15 years, I thought I had a rock-solid marriage with my wife, Linda. We don't have kids, which used to feel like a gap in our lives, but now I see it as a small blessing amidst the storm that's come crashing down on me. We met in college, Linda and I, and hit it off right from the start. She was vibrant, full of life, and had this infectious laugh that could light up a room. We got married straight out of school, and I landed a decent job in logistics while she settled into a comfortable routine at home. Over the years, we've had our ups and downs like any couple, but I always believed we were in it together, weathering the storm side by side. Until last Tuesday, when everything I thought I knew about my life was shattered by a single message on a screen. It all started innocuously enough. We were having one of those rare, lazy evenings at home, sitting in the living room with the TV playing in the background. Linda had been on edge lately, snapping at me over the smallest things, but I chalked it up to the stress of life. She was out a lot more than usual, always with some excuse about errands or meeting friends. I didn't think much of it until that night. Linda was in the kitchen prepping dinner, and her phone buzzed on the coffee table. Without thinking, I glanced over. The notification lit up the screen with a message from someone saved as Heartthrob, with a heart emoji next to the name. My stomach dropped. Curiosity, or maybe it was an instinct, got the better of me, and I picked up her phone. I hesitated for a second, my heart pounding in my chest, and then opened the message. "Miss you tons, babe." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I scrolled through their chat, each message a dagger to my heart. They weren't just flirty texts. They were graphic, filled with details about their encounters and plans for the future. It was all there in black and white. My wife, the woman I'd loved and trusted, had been cheating on me. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront her immediately? Should I gather more evidence? My mind was a whirlwind of anger, pain, and confusion. I heard Linda coming back into the room, and I quickly put her phone down, my hands shaking. She looked at me and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I forced a smile back, my mind racing with the betrayal I had just uncovered. That night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. Linda seemed unbothered, turning away from me and falling asleep almost instantly. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our life together, wondering how I could have been so blind. The love of my life was living a lie, and I had no idea how long it had been going on or why. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy heart and a newfound determination. I needed to know the full extent of Linda's betrayal, and I needed to figure out what I was going to do about it. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey filled with unexpected twists and turns that would test my sanity, my strength, and my very essence. The next few days were a blur of confusion and anger. Every time Linda's phone buzzed, I felt a pang of suspicion. She tried to act normal, but I could see through the facade. Her laughter was forced, and there was a distance in her eyes that I hadn't noticed before. I became obsessed with finding out the full extent of her betrayal. One evening, I finally decided to follow her. She said she was going out to meet a friend for dinner. It was an excuse I had heard too many times recently. As soon as she left the house, I grabbed my keys and followed at a safe distance. My heart was pounding as I tailed her car through the winding streets of our neighborhood and out into the city. Linda's car eventually pulled into a dimly lit parking lot behind an old, run-down strip mall. I parked a few spaces away, my mind racing with possibilities. Why would she be meeting a friend here? My heart sank when I saw another car pull up beside hers. The driver stepped out, and I recognized him immediately. It was Chris, her so-called friend from school. They embraced, and I felt a wave of nausea. I watched as they exchanged a few words and then, to my horror, climbed into the back seat of her car. I couldn't breathe. My worst fears were being confirmed right before my eyes. They were kissing passionately, and it was clear that this wasn't the first time they had been together. Rage boiled inside me. I wasn't thinking straight. All I wanted was to make them pay for betraying me. I approached the car, my fists clenched, and yanked the door open. Linda and Chris froze, their eyes wide with shock and fear. Without saying a word, I reached in and dragged Chris out of the car by his collar. He stumbled, trying to regain his balance, but I didn't give him a chance. "You son of a bitch!" I shouted, my voice trembling with fury. "You think you can just fuck my wife and get away with it?" Chris tried to stammer an apology, but I was beyond listening. I swung my fist and connected with his jaw, the impact sending him sprawling to the ground. Linda screamed, pleading with me to stop, but I ignored her. I grabbed Chris by the hair and hauled him to his feet. "You're gonna regret this," I hissed, my voice low and dangerous. I slammed his head into the side of Linda's car, the sound of the impact echoing in the empty parking lot. Blood trickled down his face, but I wasn't done yet. I dragged him along the length of the car, his head scraping against the metal, leaving a trail of blood and scratches. Linda was crying, begging me to let him go, but her words were just noise in the background. I felt a sick sense of satisfaction as I continued to punish Chris, my anger fueling every brutal action. He tried to fight back, but he was no match for my fury. I punched him again, feeling the bones in his face crunch under my fist. It wasn't enough. I wanted him to feel every ounce of pain he had caused me. I threw him to the ground, breathing heavily, and looked down at him. He was a bloody mess, barely conscious, but I didn't care. "If I ever see you near her again, I'll fucking kill you," I spat, my voice shaking with rage. I kicked him one last time for good measure, then turned my attention to Linda. She was still sitting in the back seat, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Jake, please," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" I shouted, my voice breaking. "You think that makes this okay? You think I can just forget what you did?" She tried to reach out to me, but I stepped back, disgusted. "Don't touch me," I growled. "You're nothing to me now. Do you hear me? Nothing." Linda collapsed into tears, but I didn't stay to watch. I walked away, leaving her and Chris in the parking lot, feeling a twisted sense of relief. They had been exposed for what they were, and I had taken my first step toward reclaiming my life. But the satisfaction was short-lived. As the adrenaline began to fade, the reality of what had just happened hit me like a ton of bricks. I drove home, my hands shaking, my mind racing. What had I done? I had let my anger consume me, and now I had to deal with the consequences. The image of Chris' bloody face haunted me, and I wondered if I had gone too far. But every time I thought about Linda's betrayal, the anger surged back, reminding me that they had brought this upon themselves. When I got home, the house was eerily quiet. I sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen, my mind replaying the events over and over. I knew I couldn't stay here. I couldn't face Linda after what had happened. I needed to clear my head, to figure out what I was going to do next. I grabbed my keys and left the house, driving aimlessly through the night. The streets were empty, and the city lights blurred past as I tried to make sense of everything. I felt like I was losing my mind, torn between the pain of betrayal and the guilt of my violent outburst. I ended up at a small motel on the outskirts of town. The neon sign flickered above the entrance, casting a dim glow over the parking lot. I checked in, not even bothering to give a fake name, and collapsed onto the bed in my room. The events of the night played on a loop in my mind, each replay more brutal than the last. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Linda and Chris, their faces twisted in fear and pain. I didn't know how I was going to face the next day, but one thing was clear. My life was never going to be the same again. The betrayal had shattered everything I thought I knew, and now I had to pick up the pieces and figure out how to move forward. As the first light of dawn crept through the motel curtains, I knew I had a long road ahead of me. The confrontation had been just the beginning, and there were still so many questions left unanswered. Why had Linda done this? How long had it been going on? And most importantly, what was I going to do now? One thing was certain. I couldn't go back to the way things were. Linda had made her choices, and now I had to make mine. The journey ahead was uncertain, but I was determined to find my way, no matter how difficult it might be. The fight for my dignity and my future had just begun. The sun had barely risen when I finally dragged myself back home. The silence of the empty house was suffocating. Every corner, every piece of furniture seemed to mock me, reminding me of the life that had been shattered. I didn't know what to expect when Linda came back, but I knew I had to face her, to hear her side, even if it tore me apart. It wasn't long before I heard her car pull into the driveway. My heart pounded as I waited, bracing myself for the confrontation. The front door creaked open, and Linda stepped in, her face a mix of fear and defiance. She looked like a ghost of herself, disheveled, eyes puffy from crying, a far cry from the confident woman who had betrayed me. "Jake," she started, her voice trembling. We need to talk. I stood up from the couch, every muscle in my body tense. Yeah, we do. But first, I want to hear it from you. How long, Linda? How long have you been fucking him? She flinched at my words, but I didn't care. I needed the truth, no matter how painful. She took a deep breath, tears welling up in her eyes. It's been a few months, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It started as just talking, but it escalated. Escalated? I repeated, my voice rising. You mean you started screwing him behind my back? How could you, Linda? How could you throw away everything we had for him? She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. I'm sorry, Jake. I didn't mean for it to happen. I was lonely, and you were always so busy with work. Chris was just there. Her words cut deep, but they also filled me with a bitter anger. Lonely? You think that justifies betraying me? I was working my ass off to provide for us, to give us a good life. And you repay me by spreading your legs for another man? Linda's sobs intensified, but my anger wouldn't let me feel any sympathy. You have no idea what it's like to feel so alone in your own marriage, she cried. You were never around, always working late, always too tired or too busy for me. Don't you dare blame this on me, I snapped. I was working to support us. I trusted you, and you threw that trust away. The room was filled with a heavy silence as we stood there, facing each other. Linda's tears streamed down her face, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. She had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and no amount of tears could undo that. Why Chris? I finally asked, my voice breaking. Why him? She shook her head, wiping her eyes. I don't know, Jake. He was just there. He listened to me, made me feel wanted. I didn't plan for any of this to happen. Well, it did, I said coldly. And now we have to deal with the consequences. Linda looked at me, desperation in her eyes. Jake, please, I know I messed up, but I still love you. I want to fix this. Can we please try to work things out? Her words hung in the air, and for a moment I considered it. We had built a life together, shared so many memories. But then I remembered the messages, the images of her with Chris, and the rage boiled up again. How do you expect me to ever trust you again? I asked, my voice shaking. You lied to me, betrayed me. How do we come back from that? I'll do anything, she pleaded. I'll go to therapy. I'll cut off all contact with Chris. Just, please, don't leave me. The raw desperation in her voice tugged at something deep inside me, but I couldn't ignore the hurt and betrayal. It's not that simple, Linda. You broke something that can't be easily fixed. We stood there in silence, the weight of her betrayal hanging heavy between us. I wanted to believe her, to hope that we could somehow mend the shattered pieces of our marriage. But the pain was too fresh, the wounds too deep. I need time, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. Time to think, to figure out what I want. I can't make any promises right now. Linda nodded, tears still streaming down her face. I understand, she said, her voice trembling. Take all the time you need. Just, please, don't give up on us. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I turned and walked out of the house, needing to escape the suffocating weight of her betrayal. I drove aimlessly, my mind racing with a whirlwind of emotions. I felt like I was caught in a nightmare, unable to wake up. Hours passed in a blur, and I found myself parked at the edge of a quiet lake, the sun setting in the distance. The serene beauty of the scene was a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. I sat there, staring at the water, trying to make sense of everything. Could I really forgive Linda? Could I move past the betrayal and rebuild our life together? Or was it too late? The damage too deep to repair? The questions swirled in my mind with no clear answers in sight. As darkness fell, I knew I couldn't avoid the inevitable. I had to make a decision, to face the reality of what my life had become. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead, and drove back home. The house was dark and quiet when I returned. Linda was sitting on the couch, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked up as I entered, hope flickering in her gaze. Jake, she began, but I held up a hand to stop her. I need to say something, I said, my voice firm. I'm willing to try counseling, to see if there's any chance we can rebuild our marriage. but you need to understand something. This isn't going to be easy. It's going to take a lot of work, and I can't promise that I'll ever be able to fully trust you again." Linda nodded, her expression solemn. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes." "Good," I replied. "Because if you ever betray me again, that's it. We're done." She nodded again, tears streaming down her face. "I promise, Jake. I'll never hurt you like this again." I wanted to believe her, but only time would tell if she was truly committed to making things right. As we stood there in the dimly lit living room, the enormity of the task ahead of us loomed large. Rebuilding trust and mending the broken pieces of our marriage would be a long and difficult journey, but it was a journey we had to take together. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. It was fragile, tentative, but it was there. And in that moment, it was enough to keep me going. We had a long road ahead, but I was determined to give it my best shot. For better or worse, this was the start of our new reality. Despite my decision to try and work things out with Linda, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't truly committed to fixing our marriage. The betrayal had planted a seed of doubt in my mind, and it grew each day. I needed to know if she was genuinely sorry, or if she was just telling me what I wanted to hear. So, driven by a mix of paranoia and the need for the truth, I decided to take matters into my own hands. One night, while Linda was asleep, I crept out to her car with a small audio recorder and a hidden camera. My hands trembled as I installed them, ensuring they were well hidden. I felt a pang of guilt for stooping to such measures, but the thought of being betrayed again fueled my determination. If Linda was still seeing Chris, I would know, and I would make sure everyone else knew too. Days turned into weeks, and I checked the recordings religiously. At first, there was nothing. Linda seemed to be avoiding Chris, or at least keeping her distance. I began to think that maybe, just maybe, she was serious about rebuilding our marriage. But then, one fateful evening, my worst fears were confirmed. I listened to the audio recording from her car, my heart sinking as I heard the familiar voice of Chris. They were talking, laughing, and it wasn't long before their conversation turned intimate. The sound of their betrayal filled my ears, and I felt a cold, numbing rage take hold. It was happening again, right under my nose. I switched to the camera feed, my stomach churning as I watched them in the back seat, wrapped in each other's arms. It was like a nightmare come to life, and I couldn't look away. All the promises, the tears, the supposed remorse, it was all a lie. Linda had never stopped seeing Chris. She had been playing me for a fool. The next few days were a blur of anger and planning. I couldn't confront Linda directly. I needed a way to expose her, to make sure everyone knew what she had done. She had to face the consequences of her actions, and I was going to ensure she did. I downloaded the recordings and video files onto my computer, piecing together the most damning evidence. It was a painful process, but it was necessary. I compiled everything into a neat little package, ready to be unleashed. My mind raced with thoughts of revenge, and I settled on a plan that would leave no room for doubt about Linda's betrayal. Linda had a close-knit group of friends, women she had known for years. They were always chatting, always in each other's business. If I leaked the evidence to them, it would spread like wildfire. Her friends would see her for who she really was, and there would be no escaping the fallout. I created an anonymous email account and began drafting a message. I attached the audio files and the video clips, making sure to highlight the most incriminating moments. My hands shook as I typed, but the anger and betrayal drove me forward. When everything was ready, I hesitated for a moment, my finger hovering over the send button. This was it. Once I did this, there would be no turning back. I took a deep breath and pressed send, watching as the email disappeared into the ether. There was no going back now. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, Linda's phone was buzzing nonstop with calls and messages. I watched from a distance as she read the texts, her face going pale. She looked up at me, eyes wide with shock and fear. "Jake, what did you do?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "I did what I had to do," I replied coldly. "I told the truth. Now everyone knows what you've been doing." Linda's face contorted with anger. "You had no right to do that. This is our private life. You made it public the moment you decided to cheat on me," I shot back. "You deserve everything that's coming your way." The days that followed were a whirlwind of chaos and drama. Linda's friends were furious, their messages and calls filled with accusations and disbelief. Her carefully constructed facade had crumbled, and she was left to pick up the pieces. I felt a grim satisfaction watching her squirm, knowing that she was finally facing the consequences of her actions. Linda tried to reach out to me, to explain, to apologize. But I was done listening. The betrayal was too deep, the wounds too fresh. Every time I looked at her, I saw the woman who had lied to me, who had made a mockery of our marriage. There was no going back. One evening, as I was packing up my things to move out, Linda confronted me one last time. "Jake, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "I made a mistake, but I love you. Can't we at least try to fix this?" I looked at her, feeling a pang of sadness for what could have been. "Linda, you had your chance. You promised me you would stop, but you didn't. You kept lying, kept cheating. I can't trust you anymore." She collapsed into sobs, but I steeled myself against her tears. "This is over, Linda. I'm filing for divorce, and I'm going to make sure you don't get a single penny more than you deserve." The look of horror on her face was almost satisfying. She knew what she had lost, and there was no way to get it back. I walked out of the house, leaving her to face the mess she had created. As I drove away, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, but also a sense of liberation. I was free from the lies, free from the betrayal. It was time to start rebuilding my life, to find a future that didn't include the woman who had torn my heart apart. The days that followed were challenging. There were moments when I doubted myself, when the loneliness and pain threatened to overwhelm me. But I held on to the knowledge that I had done the right thing. Linda had shown her true colors, and I had refused to let her get away with it. Word of the scandal spread quickly. Linda's friends turned their backs on her, disgusted by her actions. She was left isolated, with only her guilt and regret for company. I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. She had made her choices, and now she was paying the price. One evening, a few weeks after the fallout, I received a message from one of Linda's friends, Sarah. She had always been kind to me, and her message was filled with support and sympathy. "Jake, I'm so sorry for what you've been through. If you ever need to talk, I'm here." I thanked her, feeling a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there were people who understood, who saw the truth. I wasn't alone in this. The journey ahead was uncertain, but I was determined to move forward. I had faced the betrayal, exacted my revenge, and now it was time to heal. It wouldn't be easy, but I knew I had the strength to rebuild my life. One step at a time, I would find my way back to happiness, leaving the pain and deceit behind. Exposing Linda's betrayal to her friends had been satisfying, but there was still unfinished business. Chris, the man who had helped destroy my marriage, had gotten off far too lightly. He was as much to blame as Linda, and he needed to face the consequences of his actions. My anger and sense of justice demanded it. So, I decided to take it a step further. I would make sure Chris's life was upended just as mine had been. I had the evidence, and now I just needed to figure out how to use it. It was time for Chris to face the fallout of his decisions. The first step was finding out more about him. I did some digging and discovered he worked as a manager at a local hardware store. He also had a family, a wife and 2 kids. Knowing this, I felt a mix of anger and pity for his wife. She, like me, was probably in the dark about his deceitful actions. I was going to change that. I gathered the recordings and videos, organizing them into a detailed dossier. Every incriminating detail, every disgusting act of betrayal was meticulously documented. It was a grim task, but it fueled my determination. Chris had to face the music. I created another anonymous email account and began drafting a message to Chris's wife. I attached the files, making sure to include a note explaining who I was and why I was sending this to her. I made it clear that she deserved to know the truth about her husband. My hands trembled as I typed, but the need for justice kept me going. When the message was ready, I took a deep breath and hit send. It was done. There was no turning back. I could only imagine the chaos that would unfold when Chris's wife read the email and saw the evidence of his infidelity. Next, I turned my attention to his employer. Chris had portrayed himself as a respectable manager, a family man. His actions proved otherwise, and I was determined to expose him. I gathered the most damning evidence and crafted another email, this time addressing it to his boss. I explained the situation, emphasizing the moral and ethical breach Chris had committed. I attached the files and sent the email, feeling a sense of grim satisfaction. The fallout began almost immediately. Chris's wife, Anna, responded first. Her message was a mix of disbelief, anger, and heartbreak. "Who are you? Why are you doing this to me?" she demanded. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" I replied, trying to be as compassionate as possible. "Anna, I'm sorry you have to go through this, but you deserve to know the truth. Your husband has been cheating on you with my wife. I found out, and I couldn't let you stay in the dark. I'm truly sorry for the pain this will cause you." Her response was brief and filled with despair. "I don't know what to say. Thank you for telling me. I need to talk to Chris." I felt a pang of sympathy for Anna, knowing that her world was about to be turned upside down, just like mine had been. But she needed to know the truth, painful as it was. Chris had to face the consequences of his actions, and this was part of it. The response from Chris's employer came next. It was a formal acknowledgement of the email, stating that they would investigate the matter thoroughly. I knew that in his line of work, this kind of scandal could ruin his professional reputation, and that's exactly what I intended. Days later, I heard through the grapevine that Chris had been suspended from his job pending the investigation. The news spread quickly, and soon, everyone in his workplace knew about his infidelity. His reputation was in tatters, and he had no one to blame but himself. Meanwhile, Anna filed for divorce. The evidence I had provided made it an open and shut case. Chris tried to reach out to me, pleading for me to stop ruining his life, but I ignored him. He had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. The satisfaction of seeing him face the consequences was a small comfort amidst my own pain. Linda, on the other hand, was livid when she found out what I had done. "How could you?" she screamed at me one evening. "You've ruined his life. He has a family, for God's sake." "And what about our life, Linda?" I shot back. "What about our marriage? You ruined that, and he helped you. He deserves everything that's coming to him." Linda's fury was matched only by her desperation. She tried to convince me to retract the emails, to somehow undo the damage. But there was no going back. Chris had to face the consequences, just as she did. And I wasn't about to let either of them off the hook. The fallout was extensive. Chris lost his job, and his wife took the kids and left him. He was left alone, his life in shambles. Linda, too, faced the cold shoulder from her friends and family, who now knew the full extent of her betrayal. Our marriage was over, and she was left to deal with the wreckage of her actions. For me, the revenge was bittersweet. It didn't erase the pain or heal the wounds, but it gave me a sense of closure. I had taken control, refused to be a victim, and now it was time to move on. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal meetings and emotional upheaval. I filed for divorce, determined to sever the ties that had once bound us. Linda tried to fight it, but the evidence was overwhelming. The court granted me a favorable settlement, and I walked away with a sense of justice. Moving on wasn't easy. The betrayal had left deep scars, and there were days when the pain felt unbearable. But slowly, I began to rebuild my life. I reconnected with old friends, threw myself into my work, and started to find moments of peace amidst the chaos. One evening, as I was unpacking the last of my things in my new apartment, I received a message from Sarah, one of Linda's former friends. She had been supportive throughout the ordeal, offering a shoulder to lean on. Her message was simple but filled with hope. "Jake, I'm so proud of you. You deserve happiness. Keep moving forward." Her words resonated with me. I had faced the darkest days of my life and emerged stronger. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but I was ready to face it. For the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. The past was behind me, and a new chapter was beginning. Revenge had been a powerful motivator, but it was time to let go of the anger and focus on healing. Chris and Linda were out of my life, and I was free to build a future on my own terms. It was a long road ahead, but I was determined to walk it, one step at a time. The weeks following the divorce were some of the most challenging I'd ever faced. The emotional roller coaster of anger, sadness, and a strange sense of relief consumed me daily. Linda and I had signed the final papers, officially ending our 15-year marriage. There was a weight lifted off my shoulders, but also a lingering heaviness in my heart. It was over, but it wasn't easy. One evening, as I was settling into my new routine, I got a text from Linda. "Can we talk? One last time, please." I stared at the message, a mix of curiosity and dread filling me. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to move on without looking back. But another part of me, the part that remembered the good times and the love we once shared, felt the need for closure. I agreed to meet her at a local park, a neutral place where we could talk without the weight of our past pressing down on us. The park was quiet when I arrived, the sun setting behind the trees, casting long shadows on the ground. Linda was already there, sitting on a bench, looking out over the small pond. She seemed lost in thought, her face etched with the lines of stress and sorrow. Seeing her like that stirred something inside me, a mix of old feelings and new wounds. I walked over and sat down beside her, leaving a respectful distance between us. "You wanted to talk?" I asked, my voice steady. Linda turned to look at me, her eyes filled with tears. "Jake, I'm so sorry for everything. I know I've said it before, but I need you to hear it. I'm truly sorry." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The anger had subsided, but the hurt was still there, raw and painful. "I never meant to hurt you," she continued, her voice trembling. "I made so many mistakes, and I lost sight of what was important. I lost sight of us." "You did," I replied quietly, "and it's something I can't just forget or forgive easily." She wiped her eyes, taking a deep breath. "I know. I don't expect you to forgive me. I need you to know that I regret everything. Losing you, losing our marriage. It's been the hardest thing I've ever faced." We sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the park around us. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Linda, I loved you. I still do, in a way. But what you did broke something inside me. I don't know if I can ever get that back." She nodded, her face crumpling with fresh tears. "I understand. I just want you to know that I'm getting help. Therapy. I'm trying to understand why I did what I did and how to fix myself." I felt a pang of sympathy for her. Despite everything, she was still the woman I had loved for so many years. "That's good, Linda. I hope it helps." She reached out, hesitating before taking my hand. "I want you to be happy, Jake. You deserve that. If we can't be together, I hope you find someone who makes you happy." I looked at her, feeling a strange sense of peace. "Thank you. I hope you find happiness too." We talked for a while longer, sharing memories of better times, talking about our hopes for the future. It was bittersweet, but it was necessary. As the sky grew darker, we stood up, knowing it was time to say goodbye. "Take care of yourself, Jake," Linda said, her voice soft. "You too, Linda," I replied, feeling a lump in my throat. We parted ways, each of us heading into a future without the other. It was the end of a chapter, but also the beginning of a new one. As I walked back to my car, I felt a sense of closure. The past was behind me, and it was time to look forward. A year had passed since the divorce, and life had taken on a new rhythm. The anger and betrayal had faded, replaced by a sense of peace and acceptance. I had learned to let go, to forgive, not just Linda, but myself. I had been through a storm and come out stronger on the other side. My relationship with Sarah had blossomed into something more than friendship. It was gradual, natural, and built on a foundation of trust and mutual respect. We enjoyed each other's company, and for the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely happy. One evening, as we sat on my balcony watching the sunset, Sarah took my hand. "Jake, I'm so proud of you. You've come so far, and it's been amazing to see you grow." I looked at her, feeling a warmth in my chest. "I couldn't have done it without you, Sarah. You've been my rock." She smiled, leaning in to kiss me. It was a gentle, loving kiss, filled with promise and hope. "Here's to new beginnings," she whispered. "To new beginnings," I echoed, feeling a sense of contentment. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led me to a place of peace and happiness. I had rebuilt my life from the ashes, stronger and wiser. I had learned that betrayal didn't have to define me, and that forgiveness and healing were possible. As I looked out over the horizon, I felt a sense of excitement for the future. There would be challenges, no doubt, but I was ready to face them. With Sarah by my side and the lessons I had learned, I knew I could handle whatever life threw my way. The past was behind me, and a new chapter was beginning. One filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, I was truly happy. Next part 7. Resolution of the problem. As the months passed, I found myself settling into a new normal. The divorce, as painful and tumultuous as it had been, was now a part of my past. My therapy sessions with Dr. Miller had been invaluable, helping me navigate the complex emotions and guiding me towards a healthier, more balanced state of mind. One day, while discussing the progress in our sessions, Dr. Miller brought up the topic of forgiveness. "Jake, you've come a long way in dealing with the betrayal and the anger," he said, leaning forward in his chair. "But have you considered what forgiveness means for you? Not just forgiving Linda or Chris, but forgiving yourself as well." The question lingered in my mind long after the session ended. Forgiveness had always seemed like a distant, almost impossible goal. But as I thought about it more, I realized that holding on to the anger and resentment was only hurting me. It was time to let go, to truly move forward. I decided to take a small but significant step. I reached out to Linda, suggesting we meet for a final conversation. She agreed, and we chose a quiet cafe where we could talk without interruptions. When I arrived, Linda was already there, looking more composed than I had seen her in a long time. We exchanged pleasantries and sat down, an awkward silence hanging between us. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," I began, breaking the silence. "About the betrayal, the divorce, and everything that's happened since. And I realized that I need to let go of the anger, for my own sake." Linda nodded, her eyes reflecting a mix of emotions. "I understand, Jake. I've been doing a lot of thinking too, and I'm truly sorry for everything. I know I've said it before, but I need you to know how much I regret my actions." I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. "I appreciate that, Linda, and I want you to know that I forgive you. It doesn't mean I've forgotten, but I need to let go of the past to move forward." Her eyes filled with tears, and she reached across the table to take my hand. "Thank you, Jake. That means more to me than you'll ever know." We talked for a while longer, sharing memories and discussing our hopes for the future. It was a cathartic experience, a chance to finally close the chapter on our marriage with a sense of understanding and peace. Leaving the cafe, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Forgiving Linda was a crucial step in my healing process, but forgiving myself was equally important. I had been through a lot, but I had emerged stronger and more resilient. Part 8. New Life. With the past firmly behind me, I focused on building a new life filled with positive experiences and meaningful connections. My relationship with Sarah continued to grow, becoming a source of joy and stability. We spent our weekends exploring new places, trying out new hobbies, and simply enjoying each other's company. One sunny afternoon, Sarah and I decided to take a hike up to a beautiful overlook we had heard about. The trail was challenging, but the views at the top promised to be worth it. As we climbed, we talked about our plans for the future, our dreams, and our goals. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," Sarah said, pausing to catch her breath. "About what I want and where I see myself." "Me too," I replied, smiling at her. "And I see you in it." She looked at me, her eyes filled with warmth. "I see you in mine too, Jake. I can't imagine my life without you." Reaching the top of the trail, we stood side by side, looking out over the breathtaking view. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the landscape. It was a moment of pure beauty, a reminder of how far I had come and how much I had to look forward to. "Jake, there's something I want to ask you," Sarah said, turning to face me. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, simple ring. "Will you be my partner, in every sense of the word? Will you move in with me?" I was taken aback, my heart swelling with emotion. "Sarah, I'd love to," I said, taking her hands in mine. "I can't think of anything I'd want more." We kissed, sealing our commitment to each other. It was a new beginning, a fresh start with someone who understood me and accepted me for who I was. Moving in with Sarah was a seamless transition. Her home quickly became our home, a place filled with laughter, love, and new memories. We decorated together, blending our tastes and creating a space that felt truly ours. One evening, as we were unpacking the last of my boxes, Sarah found an old photo album. It was filled with pictures from my past, images of happier times with Linda, moments that seemed like a lifetime ago. "Do you want to keep this?" Sarah asked gently. I looked at the album, feeling a mix of nostalgia and sadness. "I think it's time to let go," I said. "Those memories are part of my past, but they don't define my future." We set the album aside, ready to donate it. It was a symbolic gesture, a way of embracing the new life we were building together. Life with Sarah was filled with small, joyful moments that made each day special. We cooked together, went on spontaneous road trips, and spent lazy Sundays reading and talking. It was a life I had never imagined but had always hoped for. As time passed, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The pain and betrayal had been transformative, shaping me into a stronger, more resilient person. I had learned the importance of forgiveness, the value of true friendship, and the power of love. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the stars, Sarah turned to me with a smile. "Jake, do you ever think about how far you've come?" "All the time," I replied, squeezing her hand, "and I'm grateful for every step of the journey. It brought me to you." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat in comfortable silence, knowing that our future was bright and filled with endless possibilities. The past was a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I had found happiness, love, and peace. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had led me to a place of true contentment. And as I looked up at the stars, I knew that this was just the beginning of a beautiful new chapter.